I acquired an insane 8-foot, 1,000-litre aquarium from ND Aquatics, and I set out on a mission to make it the most beautiful aquarium I've ever made. The first thing I had to do was get some lighting sorted. I got 4 of these strip lights from Superfish, which really do pack a punch and add a ton of light to the aquarium. This is going to be important for growing plants later on. Now, plants don't just need light, they need nutrients. So that's when I started making a full-on substrate system. A base layer of old material that contained a lot of nutrients went down first. Then I added some Nutri-Base to the top and covered the whole thing with a sand capping. You can see that I've created 3 kind of mounds there. That's because I want this to have a 3 island composition. It's a long tank and we can fill it up with lots of interesting areas. Given the tank was so large, I needed to spend a lot of money on sand. But to cut costs down, I bought pre-cleaned pool filter sand. Got a great texture, won't make the water all murky when I fill it up, and I just think it's one of the most natural looks you can get. Then it was time to start adding the hardscape to the tank, and at the time I'd recently been to Aquarium Gardens where I'd acquired 3 large wooden stumpy-like things. In most tanks these are quite large, but in this tank they're going to work really well for what I'm trying to achieve. I then placed rocks around the base just to make it all look like it had been there for a long time. I opted to go for darker rocks just because they give such a contrast to the sand. I think it makes them stand out even better. Sometimes it's best to make contrast when you're trying to make a show tank. Otherwise everything can kind of just blur in and merge together. Doesn't have as much visual impact. I then used smaller stones that had a similar sort of tone just to add a bit of detail around it all. And then an even smaller gravel to give the effect that the grading goes from small to large. It's one of the best ways of giving a natural impression. I then placed more detailed twigs coming out of the big wooden stumps just to make it look like it was grown right into the whole thing and kind of like roots spreading across the base of the aquarium. It was then time to add some plants, and I started with the epiphytes. These are plants that like attach to the wood. You don't have to plant them into the substrate, and they're a really good way of adding greenery and planted height. Planted height, is that a thing? Anyway, you can just place them anywhere on the wood, stick them on or just push them in cracks, and they instantly change the whole impression of the aquarium. Around the bases I had varieties of Anubias. This is quite a hardy plant and it doesn't mind being in the shaded areas, but what it does do is tie everything in really nicely. Again, I'm trying to give that impression that it's been here for a long time, and this method really helps with that. It was then time to start planting into the sand, and I've got a load of crypts that I planted all along the mid-ground. These grow about 20 centimeters high, and as the tank matures, they'll fill out the middle sections really well. You don't want them in the foreground though, because they'll cover any smaller plants that you've got. But in that middle area, they fill it out really, really nicely. Not typically fast growers, but within a month or so, they're going to look insanely good. I added S. repens and Monte Carlo to the foreground, which stays really, really short, and then added some Echinodoris to the back area. Not too many though, they'll grow big, very leafy, more of like a feature plant in certain areas. In the background area, I just went crazy with the stems. I didn't really opt for like specific areas, I just sort of covered everywhere with everything. I really like that look, kind of like a wild flower look in a garden, a little bit of everything everywhere. Now the first fill up is always a bit nervy, because at this point you can see if you've glued the rocks to your wood well enough. I suppose I didn't explain that well. Yeah, I glued all of the wood to the rock using super glue gel just to make sure that the wood wouldn't float. And as you can see, it didn't. Immediately after filling up, I thought this looks a bit boring. So I went around all my other tanks, grabbed a load more stems, bunched them all up, put a little weight on them all, and then planted them as well. Whenever you start a new tank, the more plants you can get in there to start with, the greater the chance of success, because you're not going to get a massive algae bloom, and it's just going to look beautiful straight away. The good thing is as well is that all of these plants were grown in tanks without CO2 and pretty similar lighting, so I knew they were going to do well, already converted for underwater, and just continue to grow amazing. Now it's no good having 1,000 litres of still water, so I installed 2 Fluval FX6s, one on each side, with one side's outlet nozzle pointed to the front of the tank and the other side's pointing to the back. This will give us like a nice rotational flow and make sure we don't get dead spots in the tank. You can also see the water's quite misty. There's just a little bit of dust left over from the sand, so I stuck in a little internal filter with a load of filter floss, and that cleaned it up pretty darn fast. Now I don't usually use CO2 at all, But seeing as this is my flagship tank and the best one I've ever had, I thought, screw it, I'm going for it. I got the Superfish CO2 canisters where you mix together citric acid and bicarb. This instantly produces a CO2 reaction and pressurizes the canister. So it's not quite the same as the yeast one, which is quite slow. This is like an instant thing. Obviously it's not as good as pressurized CO2, but I just like the fact that you could buy the ingredients whenever I needed and just top it up. And it worked really, really well for the first few months. After that, the plants were growing so fast, I just stopped using it. A few days later, and as you can see, it's crystal clear and it looks amazing, even in this state. This is brand new, remember, at this point. I added in an initial cleanup crew, not too much because there isn't much waste, but there is going to be plants breaking down and there is going to be algae forming on every surface. So we went with some Otto cinclus and a bunch of bristlenose plecos that I've been breeding, all juveniles, but will grow a lot larger. And I also added a few feature fish just to make sure that the tank is cyclic. This is all fresh new setup and there's no waste really being generated in the tank, which means beneficial bacteria won't have a food source. So a small group of fish, massive volume of water, testing every day, everything was absolutely perfect. You can see here a few weeks later, the plants are almost reaching the surface now and I've added more fish. It's time for its first sort of cleanup. A little bit of glasscaping, a water change, and it was as good as new again. So I added even more fish. I mean, it's a 1,000-litre 8-foot tank. You need a lot of small fish to make this tank feel like there's anything in it. And it was also time to add the stars of the show, and that was my angelfish. At this point, I'd had them for a good few months. They were getting too large for the tank they were in, and this was the perfect tank for them as a group. I also added a large group of keyhole cichlids that I had grown from babies. I got these when they were tiny little fish. And all these fish that I've selected here all go really, really well together. They're all from South America and they just complement each other as well. There's no aggression or anything like that. It just feels like full harmony. I think by the end of a month and a half to 2 months, the tank was looking its absolute best. All the plants hit the surface, you got that really cool reflection of the colors on the surface of the water, kind of like a mirror effect, and it just looked amazing. Some of the flag aquarias that I put in the tank had also been breeding and I could see babies moving around everywhere. I didn't manage to catch them on camera, but it was really nice to see. And I was actually apprehensive before I started this tank because I'd never done anything this size before with my own system. By that I mean full-on nutrients underneath the substrate, locked down, high lighting, and minimal sort of contact. I'm not the sort of person that's going to sit there doing hours of maintenance every week. Maybe once a month the tank will get, like I say, a little water change, a glass scraping, and I just let nature do the rest. And that's why I call it an ecosystem tank, because it is its own ecosystem. Okay, it's not a closed ecosystem, but with minimal interference from me, it just runs so well. It was an absolute joy to make and even more amazing to sit back and just watch it evolve on its own. I hope you've enjoyed this short form of the video. There is a full 1 hour plus video on this if you want to go into more detail, and maybe check out some of our other videos as well. I think you'll enjoy them all. But until then, I'll see you again on the next one. That's such a cringe YouTube thing to say, isn't it? Whatever.